With us now is Dan Stein. Dan, president of FAIR, Federation of American Immigration Reform. Good morning, Dan. How are you, sir? It's good to have you always. Everything okay?
Yeah, good to be with you, Paul.
Are you holding down D.C. in the office there, by the way, or have you been overrun?
Well, the whole country's being overrun right now because Biden basically decided to lose control of the border, and apparently nobody's told his DHS secretary, who keeps telling us that it's secure, including his own Border Patrol chief, who says, no, that's not right.
Yeah. When the American people see this, Dan, and the headlines are, we've lost control of the border, I mean, that takes it to a new level. And what do they mean by that? That under the present security? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, operational control means that basically if you don't have a green card, you don't play the game. If you don't have the right to come into the country, you can't do it. It means that you reduce to a fractional level, a frictional level, the number of what they call enters without inspection, or people who are uninspected crossing ports of entry, or people who are admitted who don't have the right to come in. It means you have a capacity to enforce the law for people who are paroled into the country, that they have prompt adjudication, detained during the pendency of their hearings, and then sent back home when they're deemed not eligible. So it basically means you can't play the game if you don't play by the rules.
I've never seen the impeachment pushed for a member of the cabinet in my lifetime. There may have been, I just don't remember it. But if there's anybody who deserves this guy is probably number one as far as the cabinet is concerned. Where is that now? And does it have a chance?
Well, it's something that the House Republicans would like to do, begin an impeachment inquiry for Mayorkas. The practical reality is that as a cabinet official, if they were to remove him, which of course would require majority number of Democrats voting to convict in the Senate, arguably, Mayorkas is simply serving Biden's wishes. He works for Biden. So what would prevent Biden from replacing him from somebody even worse? However, it's really a messaging opportunity and a point to be made that, we created the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 with the objective of trying to ensure interagency communication and cooperation and the efficiency of border control, immigration control. And under the politicization of the Biden folks, now they've turned it into a complete rubber stamping disaster. And as a result, people all over the world by the millions have heard that it's a freebie. You get in, you're never going to be removed, and that's why they're all storming the border. The worst part about Mayorkas is that he's a liar, and that he gets in front of the public and arrogantly says things that aren't true, threw the Border Patrol agents under the bus when he claimed that they were whipping Haitians under bridges in Del Rio, and other ways that he's really lost the confidence of the public. And the worst part is that these cartels have now taken over in such a way that they rely on the American government to complete the journey for the smuggled aliens. Cartels just have to get them to the border and the U.S. government takes over. So it's corruption from top to bottom.
I tell you what scares me, because we've seen enough of these movies, and I'm Italian American, so I know what the mafia has done as far as threatening families. And these people are so technologically advanced, and people don't give them that credit for some of the weaponry they have, some of the eavesdropping material, the drones. They probably got better selection of drones than we do, and they're flying the hell out of these things, the cartel, to get the lay of the land across the border. But what gets me is, what is the encroachment, Dan, on possibly powerful people in the U.S. House and Senate, where they are threatened and their family is threatened? That's a real possibility.
Well, the level of corruption is very troubling, because it means that the Mexican government is either completely in bed with the cartels or has lost sovereign control over those areas of the country, which is true. The cartels are, police force unto themselves, as we see from the murder recently of Americans. I mean, as you pointed out at the top of the show, they don't need no stinking badges, right? They're laws unto themselves. And the fact is, it's not just threatening Americans and the fact that they're operating all throughout our country in major cities. The financial factors, this money is going someplace, and it's going to be filling the pockets illicitly of people who are well, Border Patrol agents or politicians or I mean, just it's the natural nature of human relationships that there are going to be people who are corrupted by the money involved here. So the fentanyl coming across and killing Americans is going to be part of a complicit operation that you have to wonder, why would the Biden administration? I mean, the Democrats wouldn't even attend a field hearing yesterday put on by the committee, the Homeland Security Committee, Mark Green. They wouldn't even come. They just, it's a photo op. Never in history have we seen a president sabotage border control and then turn around and pretend like there's nothing happening. And I have theories on politically why this is possible, but the Democratic Party is not the party that it was even 20 years ago.
Well, no, I'd love to hear that theory. You can't stop it there and tease us. What do you think? What is one of your theories on this?
Well, two things. One is politically, Democrats have decided that we can print money indefinitely, so there's no limits to basically spending, and that's affect the psychology of governance. The second thing is that there's a belief that they can re-engineer the demographics of the electorate. You bring in enough poor people who are illiterate and don't have job skills, they're going to be very susceptible to promises of freebies and giveaways and goodies. And that seems to be the hallmark where the Democrats are. They lost their labor union and organized labor base after the trade agreements were signed in the early 90s. So all that manufacturing left the country, and that meant those unions all disappeared. So they had to carve out this identity politics concept, this mosaic, and it's basically become a polarized effort. And the way they characterize it is they have to eliminate what they call whiteness. Now, whiteness doesn't mean white. It seems to mean Republican, and it means adhering to certain civic virtues that we associate with the advance of Western civilization. And what they want to replace it with is not entirely clear. But all they do want to do is destroy and disrupt.
Dan, I want to tell you something else, and I think this is true. They've done something else that any communist leader would be proud of. And how they did this took generations, but they did a character assassination on patriotism. And if you think about this, and it's nothing new, it's been happening for several decades now, where if you are patriotic, you are now a racist, you're primitive. You are a Republican, you are racist, you are primitive. It is not the mode to do it. So, and you guys, these gatherings as the 4th of July parade. We've had people actually protesting the 4th of July parade. Any gathering of the military at a football game or things such as that. So now they've been so good at this that if you are patriotic, you cannot be a Democrat. And I thought, well, if you're a communist, then you're on the right track on that one. But I agree when you talk about identity politics.
Well, they pull this stuff out of the playbook from the Communist Manifesto and everything else, which, you go back to, the early 20th century, the objective was to destroy the nuclear family because the nuclear family is the bedrock of cultural transition of tradition and passing along these ideas. And suddenly, our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution are the offspring of a dramatic period in American history where Englishmen fought for their rights against King Charles, King James, to achieve the idea that the people are sovereign, that for various reasons we have, a democratic process, a parliament. Now we have a legislature. And if you recur back to the glory of these documents and the traditions that these things represent, well, that's the old way that has to be thrown in the trash. MSNBC has people on like Mistel who just talk about Constitution is garbage and blah, blah, blah. They're committed to destroying what is and don't know what they want to replace it with. And that's why we have to fight them.
Yeah, and let's say this, our immigration system for a long time has been one of the best organized if you come in the right way. I wanted to do this. You had some key findings in your report, and this report's interesting. Number one, the gross annual cost of what illegal immigration is costing us. You talked about numbers, and you are right. All of this translates into money, not only for the federal government, state governments, and for the individual. Some of the numbers on the FAIR report when we bring it down to money. Back with Dan Fair coming up next. He's president of Federation for American Immigration Reform right after this. Perez, you can fade in now. Let me get this one in before we get back to Dan.
How much do taxpayers have to spend per year on illegals?
Do you want to know?
I do.
$182 billion a year. That's what we are spending on the illegal immigrants. How many? 15.5 million. And there are about 5.5 million kids that are U.S. citizens born here. It comes to $1,156 per tax-paying American, that according to the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Why is this a problem? Do the illegals pay taxes? Very little, about $30 billion a year. The national debt, $31 trillion, and these sanctuary cities are money magnets for all the benefits and the services that we have to provide for the illegals.
You know, Dan, I often think, I hate to say this, but if you're poor in a poor state like Mississippi, if you wanted to maximize that, there are places where you could live at an even better standard of poverty than in Mississippi, because if you go to places like San Francisco, the amount of things that they'll give you there is absolutely amazing. And if you go to San Francisco and say that you're across the border as another nationality and you're here illegally, I mean, you've maximized that, from phones, free health care, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but folks are a lot nicer in Mississippi. And let's face it, Southern hospitality is what people want. Go to Hattiesburg and places like that, and you feel welcome.
Yeah.
So, but the fact is, you're right. I mean, in fact, those states have been magnets for illegal immigration for precisely that reason. And so basically, you see from Eric Adams and others, they want to be a sanctuary state, but they want the huddled masses, but not too many huddled masses, because they wind up bankrupting. In fact, what this report shows is two big things. One is that it's the state and local governments that are really getting socked financially, and the local taxpayers, but it's the federal government that's actually deciding the policy. So you have this division between who's making this crisis and the people who are paying for it. And then secondly, there's the way the Biden administration is trying to hide the border crossings now by paroling, they call it, the illegal use of parole to fly them in at night and other ways to try to prevent the optics of the actual border crossing is even more expensive. And in fact, since Biden took over, a lot of states like California, New York, New Jersey have passed laws saying if you're here illegally, you get state-funded health care. Well, that's kicking in 2023. So those costs, the velocity of the increase in these costs, which is 30% since Biden took over, is going to continue skyrocketing in the next 2 years.
I've seen the convergence of a couple of stories here, and every state, certainly Mississippi, we're dealing with rural hospitals that are anemic, and many of them are closing. But for the first time, I've seen one or two states, I think Texas was one of the states, talking about the illegals overrunning the hospitals, and they're causing them to shut down faster than normal. So that's another problem people are not talking about.
Yeah, well, remember that I said about this problem we have, this idiotic idea that the federal government can just print money indefinitely, and the Democrats have adopted this at the state level, that there are no limits to state funding. So whenever there's a problem with a rural hospital or what have you, they expect the federal government to pick up the tab. Well, that era is coming to an end for lots of reasons, including the Chinese, who kind of want to put the dollar out of business. Yeah. This is a weird time in American history where you've lost the sense of practical financial limits. These hospitals are canaries in the coal mine, just like Silicon Valley Bank. There are these early indicators that tell you that the infrastructure is being overwhelmed and overburdened, housing costs, I mean, the tremendous sheer volume. At the same time, Paul, you've got these companies saying there's a labor shortage. And yet, as you pointed out earlier, there's a huge number of Americans sitting on the sidelines, and there's millions of people pouring over the border. Well, okay, these people pouring over the border, why doesn't Silicon Valley want to hire them? Well, the answer, of course, is there's a mismatch. They are not people who have the job skills in a post-industrial information society, and therefore they just wind up costing far more than they can contribute economically. So we're just importing another poverty class, overwhelming the public schools, and making sure that nobody, not native-born Americans or the immigrants themselves, will have the job skills needed to compete with, contending superpowers in the future.
Yeah. And the sad thing about this in the past administration on that evil Trump, we had people competing for employees and paying them higher wages, and therefore wages were going up. And now the adverse is happening. But another thing, too, before I let you go, I'm not really too worried about the camaraderie between Russia and China as I am China and Mexico. Because China, if you're trying to destroy a country from within, that little relationship is working quite nicely where they're producing the fentanyl and they're handing it off to Mexico to sell it. And, man, I mean, we have, 300 a day dying now from overdoses in this country or more?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, there's no question. China is interested in doing whatever it can to weaken the United States and forming partnerships like that, transship the basic chemicals, have them put together in labs in Mexico and then ship them in. I mean, you just look at the difference between TikTok there in China and TikTok here. You can see China's got an agenda, and they have the capability and the intelligence and the application. They have not traditionally had the technological innovation, maybe a couple thousand years ago, but it would be a mistake to assume that the Chinese civilization is not here to stay and a serious contender for global dominance. To the extent that we're fighting this battle with Ukraine and against Russia, it does seem to be helping empower China. And the fact that India has not been a four-square ally of ours in the course of contending for Russian oil tells you that there's a precarious dynamic taking place as the geopolitical interests shift. And yes, I mean, we should all be concerned at the accelerating pace of Americans' relative decline. And part of it is we spend too much time trying to decide what gender we are and not really how to improve ourselves as a society.
Amazing. I don't know what's going to turn us around. Just a final question here. Do you think they're losing, and I'm talking about them as far as the Democrats are concerned, do you think they're losing some of their power out of this whole issue as far as illegal immigration?
Well, the fact that the Democrats were not punished more aggressively in 2022 for the Biden policies on the border, for example, is really kind of alarming because, I mean, what explains the election of someone like John Fetterman? If either the system is dysfunctional, corrupt, or the mail-in balloting and the changing of the procedures have so altered the nature of the electorate and how many, the underperforming electorate part of the population is now voting because of the way they changed the structure, then you probably won't see a Republican president for the rest of our lifetimes if that's the case. So even though traditional polling would show there's enormous opposition to what's going on, how do you explain John Fetterman, right? I mean, elected to the greatest deliberative body in the world, and the guy can't even understand what the guy next to him is saying.
It is amazing. Two things that played into that, I believe, was the fact that we wanted to push a federal ban or a national ban on abortion after Roe versus Wade and the Dobbs decision. Should have left it there, and anybody from South Carolina should have shut up at that particular time and not spoken. But I think that got a lot of people to the polls, along with the lethargy on the other side, but a bad combination for the Republicans. Dan, it's always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so very much for spending some time with us.
It's nice to spend time with you, Paul. Take care.
Good deal, sir.